Hi, and welcome back to Ideas at Work and Beyond. I am now sitting with Danbury Police Chief Alan Baker. The mayor should be joining us shortly. He is running a little late. Hello, Chief. How are you?
Good evening. Doing well. Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you for joining me. Just to start off, I thought you could just tell us a little bit about yourself.
A little bit about myself. Well, I am a native of Wisconsin. I was on a police department in Racine for 30 years and moved to Danbury about 2 years ago. We call it our Great Eastern Adventure.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that I too am from Wisconsin, so we have that in common. Although I'm not a Packers fan, my heart does lie in the Cheese State, so I thought I'd mention that. One of the big issues for you, I think, at this game point in the year is the number of robberies that have been occurring in Danbury. January, February, and March, there were 25?
Yes.
Okay. Do you see this as a pattern, a change, or is this something that you think you can?
I see it as a kind of an aberration. First of all, I want to emphasize that Danbury is a very safe town. We have a very low crime rate, and violent crime like robbery is very uncommon. It's very rare. Although not only in Danbury, we're seeing this across the country, and it started in larger cities, but now it seems to be spreading to the medium-sized and smaller towns, an increase in violent crime. And they attribute that to a number of different factors, from things such as the lack of federal funding for law enforcement, lack of funding for community policing, lesser numbers of people incarcerated, changing demographics. There's all kinds of theories as to why that's happening, but it's a trend that we've seen across the country, not just in Danbury. We noticed increase in robberies actually before the holidays, and it continued. But I just saw the April report, and I believe there was only 3 or 4 robberies in April. Rather significant arrest last night with some citizen cooperation, and that not only cleared the robbery that occurred last night, but occurred one other robbery in Danbury and one in New Fairfield. So citizen cooperation is very important in striking down this aberration.
Are you putting more officers on the street?
We are putting more officers on the street because we have reached our authorized strength. We have 2 officers that will graduate next week from the academy. That will put us at our full complement. And we've also, as a result of the reorganization, have increased our minimum squad car requirements on all 3 shifts.
Okay. Mayor Mark Boughton has joined us. Hi, Mark. How are you?
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining.
Great to be here. A little tight schedule tonight, so I apologize.
That's all right. It's glad you could make it. We've been talking about the robberies. Now there is a plan in place. Is it a 5-year plan?
Yes, 5-year strategic plan. Correct.
To boost the number of officers on the street. Do you think that should happen faster?
I think it's a question of capacity. Can we have it happen faster? And the answer to that really is no, because we have nowhere to put the officers at this point, even if we wanted to hire more. I think that we have a plan and we have a vision laid out for public safety in the city, and we're executing that plan. And let me just also say that while robberies might have increased at the beginning of the year, the chief cut assaults by 100%. They've been cut in half. So I guess in some ways our policing is strategic and is proactive and is working. In addition to that, the rest of the crimes were either up a couple or down a couple throughout the other categories. So we recognize that we don't want any robberies, but the reality is that we've got a few bandits, if you will, that are skewing those numbers. But again, assaults are down by almost 40 assaults in the first 3 months compared to 2006. So
do you think at the end of the year that this won't affect our ranking?
I think our challenge this year's ranking will be reflective of last year's numbers. The biggest issue we had last year was we had 4 homicides in the city. Those homicides, while they were terrible domestic issues that went on, were not other kinds of homicides that you see in big cities, breaking, entering, things like that. So they're going to hurt our overall ranking. Homicides typically are weighted very heavily in the FBI statistics. But at the end of the day, it was interesting that we ended up with the exact same number of crimes in 2006 that we had in 2005. I mean, to the number. It was really strange the way it worked out. But so at the end of the day, I think that Danbury is a safe city. We're proud of that, and we're going to continue to work to put more officers on the street, which you're starting to see the reflection of that even tonight with more traffic safety checks that we're doing right now.
And when is the police station going to be built?
It's out to bid right now. The bids are due back June the 7th. It'll take us about 30 days to negotiate and do all of our paperwork and contracts, and
Okay.
we're looking for a middle of July groundbreaking.
Okay. We have a caller, so I'm going to take a call, if that's all right with you guys. Hello, welcome to Ideas at Work and Beyond.
Yes, good evening. I just want to say good show so far.
Thank you.
I just got a couple of real quick questions, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
First one being to Chief Baker. How are you?
Hello.
Just a real quick question. I want to find out: can you drive in the state of Connecticut without a license?
Not legally. You cannot.
Okay. Because speaking as a victim, I was involved in an MVA a few weeks ago, and the guy had a Brazilian license only, and he was let go.
Yeah, that doesn't work here.
No, that's not a valid license in Connecticut, and unless there are some extenuating circumstances that weren't readily apparent, that's not our normal procedure. Our normal procedure is actually to write an infraction for operating without a driver's license and tow the vehicle because the operator can't operate it legally.
Okay. And my second question actually goes out to Mayor Mark. How are you?
Good, how you doing?
Not too bad. Just a real quick question for you, and that is to find out who's in whose pocket. Is the city of Danbury in the illegals' pocket, or are the illegals in the city of Danbury's pocket?
Well, I think we're in neither pocket. I think it's our responsibility to make sure that we have a safe and secure city, to put pressure on the federal government to do their job and to enforce their laws, to continue to elevate that upwards towards our congresspeople and our United States senators who kind of walk away scot-free on this issue but have the responsibility to ensure that federal law is followed and policed properly.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On that lines, I wanted to talk about the parade ordinance. I spoke about it earlier with Tom Soddy, and I understand it was approved in May earlier this month, but there was a glitch, and it's going to go back in June. Now, why for you, Chief, is it important to have such an ordinance?
Well, it brings some order to the process. In my prior job, I lived 30 years where we had a very well-regulated parade ordinance, and it worked very well. You know, it laid out insurance requirements. It laid out who's going to pay for what costs. It also laid out you know, expected behavior of the participants, and it worked very well. It brought some order to the whole process. Right now, we really have no parade permit process here in Danbury.
Do you think that what the city is looking at currently would meet your standards in terms of what you would like to have for the city?
It would be much better than what we have now because, you know, there's frequently accusations that, you know, standards are inconsistently applied. You know, this group is charged, this group is not charged. This group has to have insurance, this group doesn't have to have insurance, and they have to have a certain number of policemen, and this one doesn't. And it, like I say, it brings some order, it brings some process to holding a parade here. You know, we're actually closing down city streets and affecting the overall, you know, public welfare.
Now, the impetus for the parade ordinance, however, was impromptu celebrations. This does not really address that. Is there a way to address that?
I would disagree with that statement that it doesn't address that. I think this ordinance can be another tool in our toolbox in looking at impromptu celebrations. And that really was not the whole impetus. That was only part of the impetus, and I'll explain why. First of all, if you're talking about the parades after the World Cup games, which was very controversial when that happened in 2006, those are not impromptu parades. We spend a lot of time planning internally for those parades. If we know there's a World Cup game coming up on Sunday, and Brazil, for example, is in the championship game, the chief and I have probably already had 2 or 3 discussions and meetings about how many officers we're going to bring in, when we're going to bring them in, what tow trucks we're going to have there, and what kind of enforcement activity we're going to have. So there is planning going on in those things.
There's planning on your side.
And there's planning on their side as well. Those individuals know that when the game is over, they're going to be out in the streets. So we would take this ordinance, in addition to writing tickets for not being properly seat-belted and all the other issues that came up during that time period, we would also cite people for not having the proper permit to be on Main Street if they're blocking traffic and if they're holding up public safety vehicles and so forth. So I think this is another tool in the toolbox to do that, and I don't necessarily agree with that statement that it won't address that, because I believe it will. However, let me also say the other way you can address that, and we did it very successfully in 2002, aside from sending the message that we're not going to let people tie up Main Street for an hour, We also are going to provide an alternative where people can celebrate.
Okay.
In 2002, we used the green. We had a parade around the ice arena. It was great, but it only happened at the championship game. So
Right.
we were able to manage that. We didn't anticipate that there would be a parade after every single game. So I'd say, hey, the first parade, maybe that was impromptu, but it wasn't impromptu every time after that, because we ended up having to pay the $15,000 bill to hire all our officers on overtime to ensure and to sometimes enforce our motor vehicle laws and so forth. So I would argue in that case we could use this ordinance.
What about the issue of the right to assemble, to gather? I know that I had spoken to one gentleman who is with a union, and if he wanted to go on strike, he would have to get a permit from the city. And along that lines also, when you address this question, is would he have to pay the fee? Would that be waived for the First Amendment right?
Yeah, he doesn't have to get a permit on the city to walk a picket line. The only time he would need a permit if he intends on blocking traffic or intends on tying up the sidewalk.
Okay.
If he decides to peaceably assemble in an area of the city that is not going to be a burden to our public safety personnel, and we can move freely about our sidewalks and streets, and he won't need a picket because he's covered under the First Amendment to go out and state his political statement. In addition to that, the chief also has the option of waiving some of those requirements depending on why somebody's coming into March. If somebody's coming into March to say, I'm going to be picketing Mayor Boughton's budget, then that would be an expression of your First Amendment, and we would let you go ahead and have a field day picketing.
Now, you have a 3-day prior notice.
Correct.
Is that long enough for you, or is it too long? What's your feeling on that?
I actually wanted a longer period, excuse me, maybe 5 days.
Okay.
But when Mr. Gottschalk researched the ordinance, he found that the courts seem to favor a 3-day versus a 5-day waiting period. You know, sometimes our officers have off 3 days in a row, so to assemble a large group of officers may be difficult within 3 days, but those instances are few and far between, so, you know, it's workable with 3 days.
Okay, we're going to take another call. Go ahead.
Let me just interject. There's some other reasons of why we need the parade ordinance. One is it's the fee issue. Right now I have bills on my desk for the St. Patrick's Day Parade, St. Peter's Eucharistic March. We charge those individuals.
Right.
Yet if you want to march down Main Street to ask for immigration reform, we don't charge anybody for that. That march cost the city about $10,000. The Eucharistic March cost us about $3,500. But we're chasing St. Peter's on one hand, and we're telling everybody else, no, you can march for free. We want to get it on one plane. We don't want to charge them march down Main Street. Get your fee, pay your $100, get your insurance, and away you go. And as long as you're not blocking traffic and tying up the streets, you can do your march. So it puts everybody on an equal playing field. And there's not this issue of equity and fairness that we hear all the time. Why do they have to pay? I don't have to pay, or why, you know, why do I have to pay? They didn't have to pay. It's bad public policy to have that kind of setup as it is right now. So that's important for us also in terms of dollars and cents.
Okay. Take a call. Hi, welcome to the show.
Good evening, Chief. How are you?
Good evening.
I'm friends with many of your neighbors. One of them is a real estate agent. We won't mention any names, though. I love
Okay.
your lake in the back, though, with the fish. Mayor, how you doing?
What's going on, man?
I'm going to spare you my wrath tonight.
Thank you.
I hope, though, you enjoy the way I tear into your opponent when she makes the airwaves.
No
Listen,
comment.
Chief, I was at the dock yesterday at the town park with my kayak, and I blundered onto a couple illegal aliens from South America poaching trout. Okay. Can the local Danbury police enforce the fishery law? I tried to get hold of the Western District DEP officer, but I couldn't get through because of either bad battery or cell. And again, I asked them if they had a permit. My friend asked them in Portuguese, and they laughed. And at that point, my Italian-Cuban blood pressure went through the roof. Here they are plucking out 15 trout, most of them illegal-sized trout, aside from being an illegal alien. And we just answered that question. And Ms. Putnam, I enjoy your articles in the Danbury paper, but I notice most of the time you refer to them as immigrants, not illegal aliens. If you may address that. Thank you.
Do you want to go first?
I'll go first. The answer, I believe, is we could enforce it, but I'm not sure our officers are trained in the fish and game laws where they'd be comfortable in enforcing that. And typically we'd refer that to the conservation police. But I know they were out there at the park yesterday and arrested somebody for stealing a canoe in the late afternoon. Maybe that was part of what you saw. But the answer is I'm not sure, but my gut on it is no, that we don't typically enforce those laws.
And from the question you asked me, sir, I haven't actually written an article for the newspaper for the newspaper in about 7 weeks now, I think. So I'm not sure what you're exactly referring to. But when I did cover immigration,
Please hang up and try your call again. If you...
I did speak. We don't ask people whether or not they're illegal or they're legal, usually. However, I mean, we don't ask for papers, I guess. So in that terms, I'm not really sure if they're illegal or they're here legally with proper papers. So we'll go for another question. Hi, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you. Question for Mayor Boughton. Why is it that anytime anybody wants to go to the bus station to put family on the bus, they can't stop down there by the bus station without having 40 people trying to get into the car? Where is the police department on these days?
Well, I think without getting into a long, detailed discussion, I think you're referring to Kennedy Park and where the day laborers tend to congregate. And I think you have to look at several court cases, particularly the Mamaroneck court case, which was very clear that you cannot go after people that are picking up people for employment. In fact, the judge was very harsh on both the mayor and the chief for actions they took in that particular city relating to a very similar situation. And in addition to that, there's been a number of Supreme Court cases which say that you can stand in a park or stand on the sidewalk as long as you're not looking for work that is illegal, i.e. prostitution, selling drugs, things like that. We really don't have the authority to move you along. This notion of loitering laws and so forth, frankly, have been challenged many times in courts, and typically they lose. So we need support from the judges and the prosecutors that are willing to prosecute those kinds of cases that we bring before them. But we also need to get judges in place that aren't going to look at those interpretation of those particular laws and a very, very liberal approach to it. Because what happens is then is we have incidences like this where we don't have to provide a day laborer site, but we can't really regulate it or control it. Only on grounds of safety we can, and that's certainly something we do try to regulate. I've been hesitant to put officers down there because then I think it looks like we're condoning that particular activity. So it's a very, very thick thorn brush that you get yourself into, and there's a lot of advocacy groups that are extremely litigious on this issue.
One more question, then I'll hang up and let you answer it.
Okay.
Why don't they, you know, about 50% of these people are illegal, and you know
Sure.
it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Why don't they arrest some of these contractors and arrest some of these landlords that are giving these people places to live? And maybe if they can't, they can get rent or get a job. Maybe they'll move out of Danbury.
Because you know, as I just explained, they tried that in Mamaroneck, New York, and the judge said that the city had violated the rights of the day laborers by going after the contractors. And so it's a violation of the constitutional rights. And just because you're here illegally, you still have 14th Amendment rights. You still have protection of the law and due process. Okay. So unfortunately, people have tried that and they've gotten their hands slapped, and that's why we don't do it unless you want to pay a large settlement to a group of individuals for violation of their civil rights.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, there was talk about the Hispanic Center possibly providing a site near them on West Street. Do you know where that stands at this point?
I think at this point, based on the changes of leadership that are going on in the Hispanic Center, that that issue has probably been put on the back burner while they're looking for a new executive director. Again, one of the good things that the Mamaroneck decision said was that the city doesn't have to provide a day labor site. Of course, they don't provide any tools for us to regulate it, but they say we don't have to provide it. So Danbury isn't interested, and my administration is not interested in building a center or providing a location for folks. I believe that's better done by the nonprofits or the religious communities, the faith-based organizations that want to do that. And we'll certainly say to them, if that's what you want to do, you know, that's great. But at the end of the day, we're really not going to be spending any taxpayer money on that kind of facility or site.
Now, BRT will soon be starting construction on the development across the street from there. How soon is that expected to start, and when will we see any effects then on those who congregate at Kennedy Park?
Well, you're going to see some serious effects over the next 60 to 90 days. We will have plans in place, and permits will be issued for the first 21 units of that project across from the subway. But in addition to that, we also are going to be doing some work at Kennedy Park, and we're going to try to restore the grass. We're going to be planting some shrubs. We're going to try to work on some parking and some horizontal and vertical parking in there that's needed for the stores that are there.
Okay.
So there are going to be some changes that are happening. You know, again, it's not our responsibility to provide an alternate location for folks. They're going to have to figure that out. But you'll see construction workers mobilizing within the next probably 90 to 120 days out there. So there are changes coming.
Okay. We'll take another call. Hi, welcome to the show.
Hi. I had a question for Mayor Boughton.
Hi, Lynn.
Hi. First of all, Mayor Boughton, I wanted to thank you for that cleanup day. I can't believe how much stuff you moved out of Danbury and did it legally, and it was a wonderful idea, and I'm tickled pink that you did it. You might want to tell the public how much was moved. Two, maybe you should move the bus station if you can't move the immigrants. Maybe families would be more apt to use the bus if you move the station or something like that. But anyway, I mainly called to thank you for that cleanup day. I can't believe how much stuff was collected.
300 tons.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Lynn.
Thanks, Lynn.
Hi, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hello.
What's your question?
Hi, welcome to the show. Hello.
Oh, you got to turn down your TV.
Can you
Hi,
turn down your TV in the background, please?
I have a question for Chief Baker. It's about the pipe bombs on Lake Avenue, and I wanted to ask, can you tell us if there has been an arrest in that case, or if not, when we might expect to hear about an arrest?
When I went home at 5 o'clock this afternoon from the office, there had not been an arrest yet.
When I went home at 5 o'clock this
The
afternoon,
officer that
Lynn, you got to turn your TV down. That's our Councilwoman Tabersack, but go ahead, Chief.
Go ahead.
The officer that was handling the investigation came in at 4 o'clock, but we were still missing some key reports from the state police actually identifying the pipe bombs, or the suspected pipe bombs that we would need for prosecution. And we're going to try and wrap that up, and hopefully tomorrow we'll be making an arrest, or presenting our case to the state's attorney's office.
So we do have a person of interest?
We do have person of interest, certainly, yes.
Okay. Is there any reason why the public should be really concerned about this, or
No, not at all.
edgy
This,
or any?
I think, was an isolated incident. It's certainly not related to any terrorism threat. But there was some suspected pipe bombs found in a home on Lake Avenue, and State Police Bomb Squad did dispose of them, and we're following up to be sure that the proper person is taken into custody.
Okay. Let's take another call. Hi, welcome to the show.
Hi, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. My name is Ken. I'm a resident of Danbury. I have a question for the mayor.
Hey, Ken, how are you today?
Good. How you doing?
Good.
The last time you appeared on public access TV, the issue of overdevelopment came up, and you felt fit to blame it on the previous administrations and also on the Democrats in whole. And given that I've been fighting projects in the city for a number of years, a lot of them have come up in the last 6 years and have been approved, i.e. Peyton Aram and Jeanette, where a single-family house was removed and 9 condos were put in its place, the building on Crosby Street, and numerous others. How can you just say that it's other people and not your current administration?
Well, I think that you know, since the Republicans have controlled the zoning commission since 2003, we have approved exactly 9 individual condominium units. Those are the 9 you referenced, that Jeanette and Peyton Aram. Crosby Street wasn't before the zoning commission, wasn't before our boards and commissions, except for planning, because it was consistent with our plan development. It's consistent with the zone that it's in, which calls for high-density residential development in our urban core. And that's a good project. Crosby Street's a good project because we took a piece of property that was contaminated and at the very highest arc of the real estate industry couldn't be sold. Now we'll be housing individuals on that site, and it'll be used in a manner that is expected to be used by our plan of development, which was adopted on a bipartisan basis in 2002. I think the bigger issue, though, is who we run for boards and commissions, particularly zoning commissions, and I think it's completely inappropriate when parties nominate people that are intimately involved in the real estate industry or real estate agents, and they serve on these commissions. And for the decade of the 1990s, the Democrats had real estate agents running the zoning commission with an absolute conflict of interest in decision-making going on in the city. And I think the second piece of that is that we didn't have a plan of development, or we had an outdated plan of development in the decade of the 90s. The last one done prior to that was in 1986. So for about 5 critical years, at the biggest height of the building boom in Connecticut and nationwide, we had no plan to manage our development and to understand our patterns of development. That's one of the reasons why we're increasing the timeline, and we're actually going to start our plan after 5 years, although the statute requires us to do it every 10 years. We're going to do ours, we're starting it right now, in fact. In addition to that, as recently as last night, we were in front of our zoning commission with a whole host of zone changes that will affect the way the city is built and how we do development in the city. But if you look at the history of development in Danbury, we have changed rules and regulations to some extent. That horse is out of the barn. There were something like 4,000 condominiums approved in the last 6 years in the 1990s. All those projects were looked at individually instead of looking comprehensively, and we're paying the price for those approvals. It was my administration that put a regulation in our planning regulations that says if you get approval for a building and you don't build in 5 years, you lose your approval. Prior to that, your approval stayed forever. So you may not build 20 years from now. Well, the community looks different 20 years from now, and so that's why it's important that there's some connectivity between the decision-making and the boards. But I think in the long run, in particular when you look at the decision-making that's gone on throughout the city, there's some very good ones and there's some very, very poor ones. The ZBA decision in 1999 for Elmer's Diner, for example, was a classic thing. It was, everybody wanted to do well for the cancer group at that time, but the reality is once you gave that approval back in that time period, it stayed with the property forever. And what happened is somebody bought the property and built a diner when it was really meant to be a cancer support center for women. And I think we have to be careful about variances. We've got to be careful about those kinds of approvals. And oftentimes now, more than not, you'll see projects getting knocked down. And that's a good thing if the use is inconsistent with what our plan of development is. And I encourage people to read it. Most people you talk to never read our plan of development. It's comprehensive.
But what could you do specifically with the Elmer Diner situation over there? Because I think the diner actually opened today.
No, he didn't.
He didn't? No? Okay. It's opening soon. What can you do now, though? Now that it's there, now that these variants have been there, traffic is a nightmare over there. What can you do now to fix the situation?
Well, unfortunately, in a case like that, there's nothing you can do, and that's why it goes back to, A, you can't give out approvals that last with the property forever, because the community standard changes, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, and 15 years. We took out that, my administration took out that regulation. So we don't have an Elmer's Diner where we gave out a nice approval in 2007, but they don't build till 2017, and now that project is much different and looks much different. And part of that is to encourage the state to play a better role in that. If you think of Danbury, every major thoroughfare in Danbury is a state road. Main Street, 37, 39, Route 6, Mill Plain Road are all state roads. They give out curb cuts to anybody that walks into the office, basically, and they've got to play a role. Now, the state would allow, for example, an Elmer's Diner to be built, knowing that they're going to widen North Street, and we're very close to signing contracts to have that work begin. So they're sort of not having a state plan of development be consistent with our local plan of development hurts us in some of these decision makings as well. But you know, the only thing we can do also is identify parcels of land that have been threatened with development over the years. One of them is a parcel known as the Cotswold piece, and we would love to be able to somehow get that off the market, if you will, in terms of being developed. And other pieces like Don Taylor's farm out on the east side of the city. He's working with us for a conservation easement to protect 23 or 30 acres of property. And that's another tool in the toolbox we can use to help protect open space and limit density.
Okay. We're going to take one more call.
I can say something about the
go ahead.
development. That property used to be owned by the city on a tax foreclosure, and it was open for sale. In fact, a couple of years ago, we had asked if the city would consider buying it, and nothing happened. And it just turned out just recently that the developer did purchase it for $1.47 million, which basically equates out to about $18,000 per acre. So the city did have an opportunity to buy it, but we let it slip, and I doubt the guy's going to let it go at this point.
Well, I can't really say much about that, Ken, because obviously if I say the city wants to buy property X, the price goes from $1.5 million to $10.5 million. So I don't want to jeopardize any potential bargaining position the city may or may not have. But let me just say that there's approvals on that property that once again date back into the 1980s for 110 units. And again, an inconsistent, improbable application approved by a board or commission that didn't have the vision or foresight to recognize that this is an area that really has no business being developed. I don't, I can't predict what boards and commissions are going to do. I know they're in front of EIC. You were probably there last night. I can't see them making it through EIC because their application is so problematic. But the fact of the matter is that there's a classic example of a piece of property that's really incompatible for that kind of density development. A few homes, maybe, but not for, I think it's 44 or 48 units or whatever they're planning out there.
We just have...
I thought it was my understanding that they actually lost that approval. They cannot build the 113 houses that they say,
Well,
and that it will not
they
fit
have to
due
get
to
they
EIC.
have, they have to get EIC approval.
Yes.
It's subject
I know
to,
that. I've been fighting that project for 6 years now.
I know you have. It's subject to approval.
Thank you, sir. Well, that's about all the time we have today. Thank you guys for joining.
Well,
I
thanks,
appreciate it.
Liz.
It goes by so fast, doesn't it?
Thank you.
Next week on Ideas at Work and Beyond, Ivan will be back, I believe, and joining him will be the City Center Manager, who will discuss the farmers market possibly moving to Kennedy Park. That's all we have for today. Have a good evening.